Good evening, everybody. Sorry to make you wait.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. I forgot to do the Facebook. Oh, 1 second. Got the Facebook. Okay. Good. Okay. Right, so we started a new chapter yesterday, and now we're up to Gimel. So we got to do the tour here. So it says in the tour, אין מוללים לחדרות בפירוש שנותנים קמח בתוך המאכל להקפותו, בין אם ייתן הקמח תחילה, בין אם ייתן החומץ תחילה. So what is he saying? He says, right, that there's a certain technique they used to use in the old days. I don't know if they still do it today. But basically what they were doing is what it says, right, that they're putting flour inside the food. Yeah, it still happens today, this kind of thing. They put flour inside the food in order to give it a certain kind of texture, right, to make it solid. Right, so it says on Passover, for Passover, we don't do this kind of stuff. Obviously, you can understand why. So he says, doesn't matter whether you put the flour first or you put the vinegar first. That they used to use the vinegar, whatever, right? I don't know exactly what that's for, but anyway, right? So he says, "Bekimcha de'avishuna, shu kemach asui miklayot shenityavashu betanu." So he says, even if you're using flour, which was already, like toasted in the oven, right? So it was roasted, whatever. And it got dried, they dried it up like that. It says, and therefore it doesn't really, leaven anymore. It's already baked, more or less, right? So, so he says, it's still forbidden. Why? Because he says we're concerned maybe, he's going to use these crumbs, which were not fully baked. And therefore, it's going to leaven, So therefore, he says we avoid that altogether. Okay. Aval b'matzah, but he says when it comes to matzah, afwiya tchuna. So what about if you, right, bake the matzah and then you ground it up, right, and made flour out of the baked matzah? They have this today also, right? What do they call that? Matzah meal, right? Something like that. Matzah meal. So matzah meal, that's what it is, right? They bake it, then they grind it up, right? They crush it, and then they make like a flour out of it. So that cannot leaven, right? Because it's already baked. So if you want to make, let's say like a cake out of it, right? You want to make a cake with that. You're allowed to on Passover. They do that, some companies, right? They make a cake like that. With matzah meal. They also do it with other kinds of ways, other methods as well. But this is one of the methods that they use. So says the tour, that's allowed.
Sounds like the invention of a pound cake.
Yeah, and there's many types of cakes. By the way, what's going on today is that the technology for this kind of production of food is very, very, very high tech, production methods. So they can make things today you would not believe, kosher for Passover. They look like totally chametz, but they're not. You know, they have technology today which can do all kinds of stuff. They have methods. So they can do just about anything you want. They can make you donuts, right? They can make you pasta. They have pasta for Passover. They have everything. So, today the world is a different world. In the old days, right, especially Ashkenazim, they were very limited. What would they have? Just, meat and potatoes, and eggs. That's about all they could eat on Passover, right? That's about it. Matzah, meat, potatoes, and eggs, right? That was it. It wasn't a big diet, right, for them. Nowadays, wow, you can go, to the store and buy just anything, some exotic, Passover food. You hardly even feel that it's Passover, like you feel like it's just a regular weekday. Some people, they feel guilty. They're like, we're enjoying this too much, like, you shouldn't enjoy Passover that much. But the truth is that there's no such a thing like that in halakha. After all, Passover, was a holiday after all. It's a festival. So you're supposed to enjoy it. That's the whole thing. So why not have some, delicious foods? Nothing wrong with that. There's, there's reason to feel guilty about that, whatever, right? So that's what we're talking about, right? So he says like this, right? That's okay. You can do that, right? You can use matzah meal to, so what's the difference, right? That's what we have to ask, right? So he says, he doesn't really say explicitly what the difference is, but I can tell you what the difference is, right? You just have to use your noodles a little bit, right? Even though the noodles are chametz, but what can we do, right? Our noodles are chametz. But anyway, right? The point is, why is the matzah which is baked allowed and the flour is not allowed? So the answer is that the flour, right? We're concerned that they didn't bake it well. I mean, after all, it's a little bit something like it's unusual kind of thing. It's unorthodox, right? To make a cliche, it's unorthodox method of doing things. So people don't always when they put in the oven, right, that flour to toast it, right, or to roast it, whatever. They don't do such a good job sometimes. They do like a very flimsy job. But when it comes to making matzot, they do like a regular job. Making matzot, everything is done according to the book. We're the people of the book, right? So everything is done according to the book. So if that's the case, right, there's no problem. Once you made the matzah, everything was done properly. So then, you can do whatever you want with it, right? Grind it up and this and that, all kinds of stuff, whatever you want to do. So that's the difference between this and that, right? So that's what the tour says. Actually, it's a very short tour here. It's a short chapter. So I guess I'll just read through the whole thing. There's a couple more lines here. So he says, right, also, so he says another thing, right, which is that you can also use flour, which is made from, all kinds of legumes, right, like lentils, or rice, things like this, right? So you see from here, by the way, the Tur, even though he was Ashkenazi, but he was an old timer, in other words, he was before that time where they took on the custom of not eating legumes, kitniot. So therefore, the Tur ate, kitniot. He had no problem with that. So, it came in afterwards, right? It kicked in afterwards, after his time. So he was an old timer, the good old days, right? When everything was allowed. Right? So he says, right, you can use flour, which is made from all kinds of legumes, no problem, right? That also includes, by the way, corn flour. You can make like bread out of that. You know that, right? You can make like muffins, all kinds of stuff from corn flour. There's no end to it, right? Whatever, right? You can do all kinds of stuff. So yeah, so right, so it says it won't leaven, right? Because the legumes don't leaven, right? As we already learned, we learned that already, right? Quite a while ago. So it says verif v'chen Adonai v'yarsal katuv stama le'etera b'matzav fuya v'gimar. So he says the rif and the rosh, he says they wrote, right, that baked matzah, you can do what you want with it, right? You want to make flour out of it, you want to make matzah meal, whatever it is you want to do, right? You want to make farfel, right? That's another thing, farfel, right? Which the Ashkenazim they produce, What is farfel? It's like, crushed matzah, right? Like it's not flour. It's like small pieces. My mother buys that stuff too. You know why? Because she makes like these fried, like patties with it. It's like a Georgian kind of thing. Whatever. We have a custom to do that. A lot of Sephardim have this custom, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, right? The point is that the farfel is the same thing, right? It's like baked matzah, and then they crush it up into small pieces, right? Or you can also just make it into a flour. It's called matzah meal, right? That's what it's called, if I'm not mistaken, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. So that's the story, right? That's what we have. They make all kinds of stuff with that, right? What do you call it? These right, the matzah balls, for the soup, matzah ball soup, right? That's also made out of matzah meal, all that kind of stuff. Right, so okay, don't get me hungry now, right? Let's not talk about foods. I'm not hungry, actually. I'm joking. I just ate right now. That's why I'm late. So I'm sorry. I apologize. But anyway, right? There was also something else that happened. It was something unavoidable, so it got all tied up and whatever. But anyway, right? As we said, so you're allowed to use flour like that, and as we said, right? And then he goes on to say, "Uvegemara kamar de'afilu b'matzav asu echa deika avde." שמזלזלים במצות או כיוצא בזה, דאיקה למנחה שתעתה לשרויה אף בקמחה. Oh, so he says, right, that he says in the Talmud, there's something like this, that, if you have a scenario where you have slaves, right? Today we don't have slavery, Baruch Hashem, but in those days they had like slavery, but, it could be the same thing with like, workers or something, people who are not Jewish, let's say, right? Non-Jewish workers, whatever. All kinds of stuff like that. So whatever it is, right? The point is that, they're not really so religious, these people, they don't care so much. So he says, therefore, if you have people like this, workers like this, who are not really so observant, you should avoid doing this kind of stuff. So what does that mean, right? Don't use their matzah, that they baked, these kinds of people who are not very God-fearing, right? And make, farfel or matzah meal out of it, because you're gonna, right, you may come to stumble with that, because it could be that they didn't bake it properly, they're not so observant, they're not so religious, whatever. I think this kind of thing, right? Okay, very good. So that's the tour, right? Pretty much it's the whole story there. So let's go to Beit Yosef. Very good. So he brings here the source for this, right? Regarding what we said about the flour. So where is this coming from? From Mem Amud Bet, right? From the Gemara. By the way, when I say the Gemara, in most cases, right, we're talking about Masechet Psachim, right? Psachim, which is talking about Passover, right? Obviously. I'm just letting you know, right? So it says over there, right? Tan Rabbanan, En Molelin et Hakidera bePesach. So as we said, right, it tells you over there, the Braita teaches that we don't, right, as we said, right, put flour into the dish in order to make it hard or whatever, to harden it or shape it or whatever, right, to give it the texture, all kinds of things like this. We don't do that on Passover, obviously, right? You know what the reason is. I don't have to tell you. So So says the Talmud like this, right? If you want to do it, there is a way to do it. Okay, how do you do it? First, put the flour, and then put the vinegar, right? In this manner, it won't leaven, right? That's what they're telling you. But in the Torah, he said this is also forbidden. So it seems like things have progressed from there, right? We'll see how that goes. And some say the opposite, right? You should first put the vinegar and then the flour. Like Ula Amar says Ula, right? That's one of the rabbis of the Talmud, one of the famous rabbis. Right? So he says, they're both forbidden, right? Either way is forbidden. That's how the Torah wrote, right? Mishum lech amrina nazira sechor lekarma lotikrav. So he says, you know why they're both forbidden? Not because technically speaking they're both forbidden, but he says, you know what? You should stay away, like far away from the sin, So like make like a partition, like make a fence between you and the sin. Don't get too close, That's what Ula says. Ah, there you go, right? Okay, very good. So it goes on, right? Rapapa shara ledaver resh galuta lemimcha kedera bechasise amarava ika deshare ki hai milta b'makom deshchiche avde. Right? Ika de amre raba gufe machu le kida bechasise v'katav arif ve'rosh v'katav arif ve'rosh. So he brings this Gemara over here, right, where it talks about certain real life stories about what these rabbis permitted and forbade. So we'll start to analyze this, right? What does this mean for us? What does this mean? Little by little, right? The Rif and the Rosh said, right? They explain what does this mean, right? Because the words here in the Talmud here are not so clear what they mean. So they come, Baruch Hashem, to explain these words, right? Otherwise, we would be in trouble. Right? It says, Perush chasise matza afuya shetochanim ota. So it says, right? What is chasise? Right, so it says it's matzah meal, right? Like we said, right? So comes and tells you, right? Matzah meal is allowed. Why is it allowed? Because it was made from matzah, which was baked and then crushed right into flour, which we said is allowed. So there you go, right? That's what they're saying. That's how they explain this Talmud. Okay. So he says, and then they use this right for that purpose of the same purpose as the flour. Aruch, piresh kemach shel adashim. So Aruch explains it differently, right? Not like what we just saw, right? That was the Rif and the Rosh who explained it like that. What do they say? It's matzah meal, right? Baked matzah, which is crushed. But here the Aruch says, no, it's not that. Something else altogether, right? What is it? Right? It's legumes that were, ground up to make flour, right? Lentils. So, right, that's the way he explains it. And the Torah brought both opinions, if you remember. That doesn't come to leaven, right? So also, we're not concerned that he's going to switch it for other types of flour, because, it looks different and whatever, right? So, these things look different. So therefore, right, we're not going to come and switch one with the other. So these are two opinions that we have here, right? One says it's talking about matzah meal, right? Crushed matzah, or farfel, whatever. The other one says it's talking about ground legumes. Okay. So then he goes on. Umash katav Rabbeinu de'afilu bekimcha de'avusha asur limlol, right? So that which Rabbeinu said that even right with with flour which was roasted, right, and it's still forbidden. So it's also from the Talmud there. So the Talmud also says this, right? That even if you roasted the flour, it's still forbidden. Why is that? We already said, right, what the reason is in the Torah. We said the reason is because we're afraid you won't roast it well, it won't be so roasted nicely. So it may be called, maybe it may leaven because of that. It's not fully baked. Okay, good. So then he goes on. Umash katav Rabbeinu begemara kamar de'afilu b'matzav yasu. So he says, right, that which the Torah said, then the Talmud says, right, that it's even baked matzah is forbidden sometimes. What does that mean? When it's made, with people who are not observant, right, slaves, whatever, kind of people like this, So he says he's wondering about the Rif and the Rosh. Why didn't they bring this down? This element of the Talmud, right, which we just mentioned. They didn't write this. So he says, says Bet Yosef, he wants to answer that question, right? So he says, I don't think there's any room here to wonder about that. Why they didn't write this? Why is that? So he says, you know what? In the Talmud, he says, afterwards, if you read on, it comes to really, refute that opinion. So he says that's the reason why, right? The Rif and the Rosh didn't bring it because, we don't hold like that. It was refuted. Okay, good. It says, so therefore, right, there's another opinion in Talmud which says that it's allowed. right? So what does that mean it's allowed? Even if I have some non-observant people like there, like slaves and right, secular people, whatever, right? The Ashkenazim call these fried Jews, fried. It doesn't mean they're fried in the pan. That means they're secular, right? Fried. It's like a Yiddish word or something. So that's what they say, right? Even if you have Jews like that, or non-Jews altogether, right? Whatever, they're not Jewish at all. Nevertheless, right? The Talmud seems to conclude there that it's allowed in the end. Okay.
Kavod Harav, it's allowed under what circumstances?
So what are we saying, right? What's allowed? That we're baking matzot, right?
Yes.
And then making flour out of it. So we already said that's allowed, right? But so what's the chidush over here? The chidush is that even if you have some non-observant people there, right? So people who are suspicious, fishy people, fishy.
Yes.
So even if you have people like that, it's still allowed. That's what we're saying.
Okay.
So what does that mean? You can make farfel, right? Or you can make matzah meal, and and eat it from those matzot.
Okay. Thank you.
That's what we're saying. Yeah. Okay. So let's go on a little bit. So he says Hilkach Nartinan, so it says, therefore, it says Bet Yosef Kilishna Bata de Sharet. So it says that's we paskin like this opinion, which allows that. So it says the Rambam is also like the Rif. So in other words, we seem to have everybody to agree over here. Everybody agrees, right? The big three, right? The big three, which is the Rambam and the Rosh and the Rif, right? They all agree in the same opinion. So what does that mean? They all say that it's allowed to use this kind of to make in this scenario to make farfel or matzah meal in a scenario like that. Okay, good. So that's the story here. That's the end of the Bet Yosef. Okay, so we'll see the Shulchan Aruch. So it says Shulchan Aruch like this: Karmel shemehavhevin oto beor v'tochanin oto. So he says, right, there's this kind of thing where they take wheat, right, and they singe it with fire, right? They singe, and then they grind it up. So this is the process, right, that we just talked about, which is that they take like wheat and they singe it, so it's supposed to be like cooked already, somewhat, but we're still worried, right, that it wasn't cooked properly, as we said, right? It wasn't baked properly, it wasn't roasted properly. So he says, what's the reason why? As we already mentioned, right? The reason is because we're afraid it wasn't baked well, and therefore it's going to leaven. Right? כשמבשלים אותו. וכן כשמוללים הקדרות לשות, אין מבשלים בהם אלא מצה אפויה שחזר וטחנו אותה. So he says, therefore, right, the only thing which we allow, as we said, right, if you want to have this kind of a thing, to use, like flour, right, which is made out of, right, kosher for Passover flour. So how do you do it, right? Like they do it today, which is they bake matzot, they grind it up, and they sell it to you, right, for a big profit, right? Matzah meal, right, in the store, right? So that's the way it is, right? So I'll tell you something funny, I was just, when I was praying in the shul tonight, one guy tells me, and he says he ordered, like matzot for Passover. He already ordered it, so he wants the soft matzot, the Sephardi way, the Sephardi. So he ordered that. So he says, "Yeah, I paid $65, for a kilo." I was like, "Oh my God, wow, the prices are going up. $65 this time." So he tells me a joke. He says, "I don't know how they call it lechem oni, like poor man's bread. It says it's cost $65. How can that be poor man's bread?" So
Maybe he should take the class and learn to make his own, save a few bucks.
Oh, he also suggested that. Very good. Okay. But I gave an answer. In other words, he made a joke, and I also made a joke. I said, you know why they call it the poor man's bread? I told because it makes you poor. The one who buys it, he becomes poor. That's the idea. You got it?
Then only charge him 40 for the class and he'll still get a deal.
Okay. All right, that's the way it is. Okay. So in the old days, it was you eat it because you're poor. Now, right, if you buy it, you become poor. That's what happens. Okay. We still call it lechem money, right? The poor man's bread, because it makes you poor. Okay, so right, as we said, so that's the only way you can do it, right? The kosher way, right? As we said, the kosher way is what? That bake the matzot and then grind it up and do what you want with it, right? Whatever you want to do, right? Matzah ball soup, you want to make sponge cake, you want to make donuts, pasta, God knows, whatever you want, right? Do what you want. Right? Once you did that, you're good. Okay, that's the story. So yeah, that's the end of the chapter, I think. Maybe we can start the next one. I came a little bit late, so I have to compensate you guys. We do some compensation here. I can't let you go so fast. That would be like shortchanging you. So
If matzo meal doesn't live in, how can it rise in an oven and turn into a cake? It seems like it would just stay flat and hard.
oh, that's a good question. I don't really know how they do that. As I told you, they have incredible techniques today. So, everything goes. You know what? Call up Manischewitz and they'll tell you the secret, right? If you give them some money, they'll probably give you the secrets. So how they do all those things. I don't know. God knows how they do it. I have no idea. Honest with you. Honest to God, I don't know what they do. Okay. So one of those things. All right. So let's go to the next one. Yeah, we're almost done, I think, with the laws of Matza. We're almost done. We're getting there. Then probably, we'll after we finish the laws of Matzah, Bezat Hashem, we'll go do some other laws of Passover, the important things, the crucial stuff that you need to know, right? To get by the holiday, right? To make sure the holiday is kosher, right? Not only happy, but also kosher as well. Okay, so yeah, this is also a short one here. So says the tour here, right? חרדל או שאר מיני טיבול שיש בהם מים או אין נותנים בהם קמח ואם נתן לתוך החרדל יאכל מיד. Oh, look what he says, right? Watch out, right? So chardal, you know what chardal is in Hebrew? It's mustard, right? So he says, don't put flour into mustard, right? Because mustard is very sharp, right? So it'll cause it to leaven. Pretty obvious, right? But he says if you did put it right by mistake, let's say, right? Oh, gee whiz, I put my flour into the mustard, by mistake, right? So what do? So he says, eat it right away, right? Before it leavens. Swallow it right away. That's the solution. Right? Velo ishanu shema says, don't let it, sit, right? Don't let that thing sit because it's dangerous, right? You're gonna get into trouble. Right? ובשאר מיני תבונים, כיוון שאינם חדים כמו החרדל, ודאי החמיץ וצריך לשרפו. Oh, look what he says, right? Incredible. So he says, but if you're doing other types of dipping, right? In other words, mustard is one kind of dip, right, that we use, to dip stuff in there, to give it flavor, so forth and so on. But he says, if it was something like not so sharp like mustard, for instance, you go to the Chinese restaurant, right? You have the mustard, you have the duck sauce, right? You have the sweet and sour, all that stuff, right? You have different types of sauces, right? All kinds of dips that they have there. So what he says is, right, if it's less sharp than mustard, so he says then it'll leaven even faster. So therefore he says what you gotta do is burn that sucker, right? You can't eat that because it'll leaven so fast, you won't manage to get into your mouth until 11s. Can you imagine? So, right, what's the chidush over here? Right, the chidush is that the mustard, because it's very sharp, it doesn't leaven as fast as the things which are less sharp. Right? I didn't know that, by the way. Right? You learn something new every day. There you go. Right. So that's the tour. Okay, so let's see Bet Yosef. That's the whole chapter here, I think. Right? We're done. Whole chapter, 3 lines, 4 lines. Okay, so it says here, Bet Yosef. Where is the source for this? Right, for the mustard. Mishnah bePerek Kol Sha'ara. It's in the Mishnah. Right, Mem Amud Bet, same place as we said before. En notrin kemach letoch haroset, right? So it says we don't put flour into the haroset, right? Velo letoch chardal, and not onto chardal. So these are like, the chardal, as we said, is the mustard, right? Haroset is a different kind of sharp thing, right? Some kind of sharp substance. So we don't put it inside that kind of stuff. V'im natan yochal miyad. So he said, if you did it, eat it right away, as we said, right? That's the solution. Rabbi Meir but Rabbi Meir even forbids that, right? In other words, it makes you throw it away, right? Or to burn it, right? Depending on if you're in Passover or before Passover. If it's before Passover, you can you have more options. But but during Passover, you got to burn that. So, good. So it says in the Gemara. It says over there, right? This was the Mishnah. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rav Kahana machloket letoch hachardal, aval toch hacharoset divrei hakol yisaref miyad. So he says the dispute is only regarding the mustard, right? There's a dispute whether it's allowed to eat it right away or not. But he says when it comes to charoset, right, which is even sharper. By the way, this is not the charoset that we use, for the Passover or Seder. That's not what it is. It's something else. This is a very sharp substance, like something really, really nasty, nasty sharp. So, right, it says that everybody agrees you got to burn it right away. Because it's that stuff will definitely cause it to leaven. Right. Okay. So
if you're having brisket at your Seder, it's common for people to accompany that with horseradish.
Yeah, horseradish is okay, no problem. Ashkenazim, they eat horseradish on Passover, right?
But if
we don't really touch that stuff so much, horseradish on Passover. But the Ashkenazim, that's their maror.
Yeah.
Right? That's their maror. So, not all of them, by the way. Some of them have, come to their senses, and started using romaine lettuce like everybody else. Right? Like us. Because but some of them are still adamant, to use the horseradish. That stuff is like deadly, my God. Okay, so by the way, you can't use, if you're using horseradish for maror, you can't use a pickled one. You have to use raw horseradish, right? Which is really, really sharp. The pickled one is relatively mild. So we're going to talk about that later, some other time. But anyway, right? So he says here, brings the Rashi. It's machloket. There's a deshar le'tana kamakal lechlo miyad. So the first opinion allows you to eat it right away, right? That's only if you put it in mustard, he says. Rashi, right? He brings the Gemara. So lefi shehu chazak ve'enu menicho le'mera le'chamitz. So he says right, just the opposite, right? As we said in the tour, same thing, right? The mustard is the strongest thing, in this competition, right? We have the contest over here, right? The mustard is the stronger one. So therefore, he says, right, since it's stronger than the haroset, it won't let it leaven so fast. So you still have a chance to eat it right away. So says Rav Ashi, right, passing like Rav Kahana. Because Shmuel said, right, etc., etc. He says, even if we pushed it out, this source. But he says, since Rav Ashi holds that way, says that's how the authorities paskin, right? Like Rav Ashi, right? So that we pass like Rav Ashi. Okay, good. So we'll see, right? What that comes out to be in the Shulchan Aruch, right?
Kavod Harav, who was Rav Ashi?
Rav Ashi was the redactor of the Talmud Bavli.
Oh.
He was the one who pretty much wrote it up, basically. He was the Bet Yosef of the Talmud.
Wow. Okay. Thank
Whatever Yosef did for us, right? He did it for those guys, right? In Iraq, right? In Babylon, right over there.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rabbi was the last word in the Talmud, basically, right? Okay, so he's a big guy, right? Very authoritative. Yeah. Usually we go like him. Okay, so right, that's the story. Then he goes on, right, regarding what the Torah said. "Umash katav Rabbeinu sheyesh behem mayim," and whatever, right, the Torah said that there's water in there. Kach katav Rosh. Rosh says that pashut. So he says it's obvious that the im lo ken meperot hem benam mechmetzin. If there was no water, right, it would just be fruit juice. So, then it wouldn't leaven, right? So in other words, there has to be water in there, and that's the whole problem, right? In other words, when we're talking about, right, mustard, right, that it leavens, we're talking about that it has water. It's not raw mustard, because that would not leaven. It's a fruit. You understand? So relatively speaking, it's a fruit, right? Whatever, right? So. But once you put the water in there, that's what does the job. That's what causes it to leaven. That's what we're saying over here. Okay, that's the end of the Beit Yosef. So we're going to do Shulchan Aruch and we're done. Baruch Hashem. We're done. Finished the whole chapter here. I knocked it off pretty good. But we have to bring up the Shulchan Aruch here because it was a new chapter. New chapter has to be brought up in this program. In the Shulchan Aruch, I'm saying, has to be brought up, not in the Beit Yosef. Okay, so let's see. Here we are. It's not as slow as you think. It's pretty fast. Okay. So, says Shulchan Aruch, Chardal or Shar Mine Tibur. So he says, right, mustard, right, or other types of dips, right? Sheyesh behem mayim, and there, there's water in there, right? Like the mustard you buy in the store, right? It has water in there, right? Obviously. And notnin behem kemach. So he says we don't put flour in there, right? Be careful. If you put it inside the mustard, right? What does he do? Yochal miyad, eat it right away, right? Don't wait. Don't make some emails, don't do texting, first, right? WhatsApp, right? Eat it right away. Then you can play with your phone afterwards, right? Why is that? Because it may, leaven, right? If you let it wait. So it says, as we said, right, that when it comes to other types of dips, which are not as sharp as mustard, right? Let's say your duck sauce, right? Whatever, I don't know, God knows, right? So there, right, it leavens even faster. So there, it's not going to help you to eat it right away, right? The dai chametz, it says for sure became chametz. Therefore, you got to burn it. If it's already, Passover, right? Chametz is forbidden. So if it's already Passover, or even like before Passover, right? As we said, from that morning, it's already forbidden before Passover even. So therefore, right, if that happens, you got to burn it. That's the only solution you have. Okay, very good. So let's see the Ramah. There's a Ramah here. So says the Ramah. Look what he says. Incredible, right? Says the Ramah. The custom is we don't eat, right? We don't eat mustard on Passover. Even if it got mixed before Passover. So why don't the Ashkenazim eat mustard? Anybody know, right? Can anybody guess?
It leavens, no?
No, it doesn't. It itself doesn't leaven, right? It's just a vegetable. It's a legume, right?
Mixed with the
Then
flour.
what's the reason why they don't eat it? So says the Ramah, the reason is because it's considered to be like a legume. It's the same category. So the Ashkenazim consider mustard like a legume.
Oh, it's one of the 5.
So therefore, right, since it's one of the legumes, right, their custom is not to eat legumes, right? So mustard is, by them, is considered to be like a legume.
But I
Mustard,
don't
right?
understand.
In its raw form, right? Mustard is like a seed, basically.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's like a legume. By the way, the same thing also applies to hummus and tchina, right? We love to eat that, the Jews, right? Especially the Israelis. And you can't have that on Ashkenazim can't have that on Passover. We Sephardim, we eat that stuff, but the Ashkenazim, they don't. It's legumes. So that's the story, right? That's where we are. Okay, so very good. Baruch Hashem, we did a pretty decent job. So Baruch Hashem, we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. And right, you should have only sweet things, right? No mustard, right? Charoset, we don't want that stuff. We want only good, sweet stuff, right? Good stuff, good life, sweet life. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow, Hashem. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov.
Zachem Baruch.
Thank you so much.
All the best.